Hi, I'm DJ Ware. On this episode of the Cyber Gizmo, we're going to be looking at an updated version of Clear Linux right after this. Clear Linux, of course, is a rolling release, so you don't really have a July update or a May update. It's just there are different times of the year that they bring out the ISO files, and this one's been out for a while, but I thought, it's due. I haven't done this since October to talk about what's new and what's going on with Clear Linux. So let's get started. Let's always start with a quote from Gordon Moore. And this is, with engineering, I view this year's failure as next year's opportunity to try it again. Failures are not something to be avoided. You have to have them happen as quickly as you can so you can make progress rapidly. I wish marketing people would learn this because it's so true. Nobody wants to pay for failure, but failure is part of the learning process. You don't always get it right, but you want to get it out. You want to make sure that what you're developing will work. So you have to expect failure, because unless you're doing the same thing over and over again, then how are you innovating? If you're always doing the same thing, how are you innovating? So let's talk about what this thing is. So if you think that Clear Linux is something that anyone can use, no, that's not its purpose. It is not a general purpose Linux distribution. It is a rolling release. It's purpose built for IT professionals, people that are working in DevOps, artificial intelligence, cloud computing. They're working with containers or virtual machines. It is a corporate world Linux. That's what it's for. So Clear Linux is fast, and according to IONOS and Phoenix, it is the fastest distribution available. We're going to find out if that's true or not. We're going to test this claim. At least with the benchmarks that I have put together anyway. So it is highly tuned for the Intel platform, and of course it will work okay as well on AMD, and a lot of the optimizations carry forward, but let's be honest, not all of the innovations that are in the Intel chipset are in the AMD. So or in AMDs. There's a lot of things that Intel does that AMD has not adopted, and generally is because of patents. So, but all aspects of the Linux distribution are optimized. So all parts of Clear Linux, such as the kernel, the development libraries, the compilers, they're all enhanced. They're all made up to get the maximum amount of speed out of them. I've talked about this before, where Clear Linux is trying to come in and fix this mess that we have with our files. Now, we usually have user data, we have the operating system, and we have system configuration files. In a regular Linux distribution, those have been scattered all over the place. It's almost like somebody was disorganized, they didn't keep things together, and so we ended up in this mess. Why is that a problem? I mean, you could put configuration files anywhere, and it's usually fine. It's just that if you organize them, then you can do things like what Clear Linux can do, is if you get your state, and I just had this happen. I was experimenting with trying to get the NVIDIA drivers working with using the latest ones for my graphics card. And it worked. They came up, but the color mapping was completely wild. I don't know what mapping they were grabbing, but it wasn't BT710 or anything that would be recognizable by a camera. So, I had to roll back. And the easiest way to roll Clear Linux back is to delete your etc directory and reboot. And once you do that, it will reload a default operating system back in, and you'll start over as a factory reset. So it makes it nice. Also, the file level separation is stateless, and the updates are Delta. So it makes it very quick to get things done. Some of the other features that are in this is most of the optimizations for the compiler come from the compiler flags. You compile twice to ship multiple binaries or multiple libraries. So It makes it a little bit easier to package things up. It ships the latest Linux kernel with it, but there's also an LTS kernel that you can deploy if you wish. So things like I was doing with DKMS, if I stay on the rolling kernel, that DKMS has to be rebuilt every time for the NVIDIA driver that a new version of the kernel comes out. Well, I've run into issues before with that where all of a sudden it fails because one or other of the two haven't stayed in lockstep. So yeah, you can get failures in the compile with newer kernels. So LTS, if you use an LTS kernel, at least that'll slow it down enough that maybe the two parties are staying a little bit better in sync. The other thing is security. There's an aggressive mitigation policy that's in place and is installed on Clear Linux. There's what they call the Unified Trust Store. That's a common place to store your certificates. And there's industry standard security features. One of the things that comes with the mitigation policy is a mechanism to constantly check for CVEs, any kind of vulnerability issues that your system may have, and then it will alert you to those. There's containers. You can support Docker and Kubernetes. There's also Kata containers. Kata containers is kind of like it's kind of a small virtual machine that sits in front of it, so it gives you a little bit of extra security besides just having it reliant on the operating system, the host operating system for your layer of protection. Because it's a pretty thin layer, it really is. But Kata has a small virtual machine that just provides one extra layer of security. And then there's Acorn, which is a mechanism that they're moving to. I'm probably going to test this over time. I keep promising to do this, and this has always been kind of one of the development areas of Clear Linux. So yeah, I mean, as far as I can tell, this is still pretty heavily under development, and yeah, it'd be interesting to see how all this works. This is supposed to be a service virtual machine, a service-related virtual machine. So what do you need to run this thing? So Intel says you need a machine that supports UEFI. So it's you need something within the last 10 years. You will need an x86 64-bit machine. You can run on a single CPU, but they really recommend that you have more than one, have a dual or a quad. Or higher if you can. I mean, most of the modern CPUs today is not a big issue. One of the problems that you will run into, and you'll run into this with virtualization, like Proxmox and Zen or XCP and G, is that it requires supplemental streaming SIB extensions 3, 4.1, 4.2, and also the carryless multiplication, the PCL, MUL extensions need to be available as well. Clear Linux, before it will boot into the live ISO, it will check to see if your system is fully compliant. If it isn't, it'll print an error and stop. It won't go any further. So if it knows that it can't properly boot this, then it'll just shut down and stop until you enable the features that it needs. Yeah, recommended is the same. 4 gig of memory. You can run it in one, but they recommend 4. 20 gig of disk and a graphics device with OpenGL support for performance, and a network supporting an active internet connection because your bundles come from online. Let's get started and create a virtual machine, and I'll go ahead and get started here. As usual, I'll go through all of these things. There's not anything. I just passed it up. It's right there. You'll notice that says 36010, but after the update, it will put us at the latest release, so no big deal. So the graphics card, I can leave it default, but I am going to go to Spice, and then that should be fine. Let me just make sure. Yeah, that should be fine. This should also be fine, and when we get to the CPU, we'll want to turn on advanced here. So I'm going to go ahead and push that up to 4. This needs to be set to, and I think I talked about this before, this needs to be set to max. And then all the way at the bottom, turn on AES. Max allows it to pick up the SIMD extensions. Probably a little bit more than that because you are telling it that it's the latest. I don't think that matters, but that's what I did before and it worked. So hopefully this will work fine too. If this doesn't, and we'll find out here shortly. Let's go ahead and start it. There we go. And it did pass all the checks. You saw it say it was checking through all that and it said, okay, okay, okay. So now we're going to wait, and then it should come up here momentarily. Famous last words. Okay, so I'm up, at least in the ISO, the live ISO. And now I want to install it, so we'll do that. This hasn't changed that much from the last time I did this. Yeah, I think I can just do that. Keyboard US, need to select the media. We'll do a destructive. It's gonna, I don't have anything there other than the virtual drive. I need to manage a user. Okay, and then telemetry. I'm going to say yes. And we'll go ahead and install it. Now let me cancel that. There are some advanced options here so that if you know that there's some of these other bundles that you might want, that you can pick them. Or you don't have to do them now, you can do them later. I can assign a host name. I should do this because if I don't, then it's going to assign this long string. Yeah, it's basically a hash. If you want to go to the LTS kernel, you can just select it right here. I'm going to leave it at native. There's no reason for me to change that. And then I can, if I want to change those, I can. And then test the network settings. I'm just going to go ahead and install because it will figure that out. Hopefully it doesn't. It's been iffy whether it'll start the install or not. So it looks like it's working. Sometimes it'll fail for no reason, and you just try it again and it goes. Yeah, I don't know. Some timing issue, I think. So we're done. Took about 4 minutes and or so to install. So I'm going to go ahead and press exit here, and that should bring us back to this, and then I can just restart. So yeah, this is part of Intel's intel.01.org project, so that's why you'll see the docs listed that way. So these are all the available bundles, and they have started to add, I don't remember this here either, the status flagged as whether they're active. It looks like maybe they are starting to deprecate. There's one, there's 2 of them, they're pending delete. There's a deprecated. So it is telling you which ones are current. I'm probably just going to do a brief walkthrough because, to be honest, about the only thing that has really changed with Clear Linux since the time I did the October update is, of course, there's been kernel updates and package updates and updates to GNOME a little bit, but it's not a whole lot different than it was, except there is some differences here. So if I look at the swapd command, you'll see that now they have provided, I do remember it having a search before, but I don't remember this. So you can actually, let's see, let's try this. I have to be sudo for it because it searches the actual bundle list. So yeah, so we'll do a search and we'll look for a file. Let's look for NFS. And it starts to go through and look for anything that has a file type NFS. So this makes it a little easier in finding, because before you'd have to go look at all the packages, or excuse me, bundles. You'd have to look at all the bundles to see what was in it, but then you didn't really know what files it was going to install. This is really nice because now you can actually go pinpoint where things are. And then you can come back up and actually find, here's the name of the bundle that has that particular file in it. Now that's all Ceph. But yeah, I mean, it's really nice. It's helpful. It's actually helpful. And it is pretty quick in doing the install. Now, the first time you do it, it has to download all the bundle descriptions. And so it'll take some time to do that, depending upon the speed of your internet and which mirror you have chosen to go for it. So that's number one. Number two is if we look at the Etsy directory, and I think I've said this before, there's not much in there. There's not even an FS tab file. So you have some setup work that you're going to have to do manually in order to get it configured so that you have things like, I mean, if you will, here, for example, let's take a look at this. So you'll notice that even though I have started the service, I did an enable on system control, I did an enable SSHD, and then I did a start on SSHD. And it built the keys, but you'll notice there's no config. So in order for me to tailor the SSH service and the SSH client, I need to create those files. Now I can copy them from another machine, and that would help me because I'm going to replace these not with RSA keys, but with certificates. So, yeah, and I have a video on that, on how to do that, and that gets you around the top the top message when you go to a machine and go, ooh, wait a minute, I've never seen this before, because it'll, and then you can expire keys and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of cool. So anyway, so you have some setup you need to do. I have done the updates, and you can do that by doing a swapd check update. Now, you probably remember that I had mine set up to do automatic installs of updates. So I picked that on the install. So I believe every time you restart the machine, I don't know, maybe periodically it'll check and start them up. But I don't know that for sure. So periodically, let's say this, periodically it'll update from any updates that come to the repos, the bundle repos. So I'm currently at the most current 36580, and that's using kernel 518.6. So that's a fairly recent kernel. It's not the most recent, but it is fairly recent. And it has the latest patch as of June the 23rd. So as you remember, when we installed, we had March, I think it was the 9th, that came with the base ISO that had the live ISO in it that allowed me to bring up and install this. So that was based on 5.16, I think it was. And this is not an LTS kernel. If it was, it would tell you that. It would say it was LTS. The other thing that we want to check is, I just booted this, so hopefully it hasn't had a chance to build up too much memory in cache. So usually it's around 650, 670-ish meg that it's using. Right now it's come up a little bit to 706, but I suspect, and we can check that, and I have installed Glances. Glances, if it wasn't here, it would tell you where it was. it kind of gives you a hint as to which packages to find it in. So Glances is saying 986 meg, and that is, of course, with the app caches computed into that total. So, yeah. Let's see. The only other thing that we can look at here, I guess, we can look at some of this. I mean, I could go through all the same utilities that I did back in October, but I think instead, if you look over there, I'll put a link to the October video, and I don't know, maybe I can do a jump to a certain point in that video, and then I can just take you there, and you can look at a longer version of the walkthrough. But even the background is the same, so there's really not much point. Other than, like I said, there is some new display options. You have some different resolutions now, but yeah. So we're taking about almost 10 gig worth of disks. So yeah, the bundle concept will install more software on your system because it's packaging things together in groups. Now, Intel and let's not say Intel, the Clear Linux team has been working to try to make it more atomic on the bundles so that they don't install quite so much. When they first started out, way back when I first reviewed this, you probably remember it had long lists of packages that were in each bundle. They still have those, by the way. So if you want to deploy a development platform, it'll install all the things that you need for development all in one go, including debuggers and tracers and logging utilities and yeah. Anyway, yeah. So I think there might even be instrumentation in some of those, so that if you're tracking down performance issues, you can do that. All right. The only other thing is we should probably look at Linus. And we'll see what this comes up with. This system runs noticeably faster, and I think in the benchmarks you'll see that getting pointed out. This thing is just, yeah, I've never seen Linus run that quick before on a machine. This is the same machine I have run every operating system on. This is Proxmox, and I've run this on every machine. So I got a 66 score. That's failing. If you remember the video I did on that, so that's failing. One thing that I did correct that came up here in a warning was I got that GP check again, and the wheel group is missing, and so GP check said, add it. Do you want to add it? And when I ran it, I did a sudo GP check, and it asked me if I wanted to add the wheel group to Shadow, and I said yes, and it took off, and it was done. So now Linus isn't complaining anymore about that. It did not change my score. My score when I had that was 66, and it still is. You can validate that on your own, but nothing in here is. There's not much. I'm looking. Yeah, there's not much in here. It's the same things that I always find on just about every distro. So it isn't more confused that some of the things that are missing at Etsy, for example. And now it probably isn't able to check things like the login config or the defaults or security. So yeah, and as you add things, you may find that it starts to find additional errors. Because you had missing data, it didn't bother to do anything with it. It didn't check it. So that's not a good practice for a vulnerability tool to be looking at, but hey, it's free. What do you want? What do you want for nothing? So I don't, other than the problem that I had when I started to put out I think I explained this. I did try to put out the drivers for NVIDIA and the the color mapping for the display. It went haywire. I mean, it was, when it came up, now the primary monitor, it was fine. secondary monitor, it was yellow. And I showed that in an earlier part of the video where you could see kind of the background, but it was washed out by the yellow overlay. Clearly, the color map is wrong. Once I installed the NVIDIA driver and I rebooted, that went away. That problem went away, but the color map between the primary and the secondary, the secondary screen still had a greenish tinge. So it was the coloration was completely wrong. Even though it said it was color temp of 8800, clearly there's something else going on there. But I went to try to change the color map and the system hung. So, yeah, I think there's some problems there that probably need to be addressed. I noticed that problem was more prevalent in Wayland. And now you can't change it from Wayland on the live ISO, so if you're using a second monitor and it comes up yellow, that's why. But I did get it to go away if I went back to X11 org, and that whole mapping problem just went away. So now I don't know about NVIDIA because I never got that corrected. It looks like that could be a driver issue with NVIDIA, but I don't see that on any of my other systems, and I'm running the same driver. So I think it's definitely a problem with Clear Linux. Anyway, I beat that problem to death. As far as the look and feel, we can look at it if you want, but it isn't going to be strikingly bad. Now this had a bug where it started to well, maybe it's going to work this time. There seems like there's some flakiness in the system where one time that you launch it, you're able to get things to work, like this is now working. And then once I do an update, I come back and now the flat hubs don't work anymore. So yeah, it seems like, I don't know, maybe they're not doing as much testing as they used to, or maybe they need some help with people doing testing. I don't know. It could probably more the latter. Nobody likes to do testing. Nobody. unless you're twisted. I just want to see what else is in here. I said I wasn't going to do a walkthrough, but maybe I'll do a little bit of one. Okay. So this is first time load, so it's got to cache all this stuff up. Let's see if it actually is FlatHub. It is. And of course, there's no option for a bundle because you don't install bundles this way. The way this works is there's a mixer tool that you use to create your bundles, and from that you're pulling in all this stuff from the RPM packages because it is based on RPM. It pulls those in, it pulls in any OS components that are needed for the system, and then when swapd runs, it actually updates everything at once and creates. Basically, it's laying down an image of the system. So. But it is doing deltas. It's not bringing the whole thing down again and then relaying it all out. It only changes what it needs to. So it isn't a dumb design. It's a very intelligent design and very well put together. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to go through a whole lot. I mean, it's, doing some of this is just kind of silly. This is from my failed install of NVIDIA. So yeah, there's a place in there where, that is the other thing I should mention. So swapd now has the ability to check the system for integrity problems. Like for example, two packages come down that are different versions and they're overlaying each other. It can straighten that kind of a mess out. So yeah, they've really improved the swapd process quite a bit. And that quite honestly, is where most of the changes in this particular difference between now and last October seems to be. Now, if you know something I don't, please put something in the comments and let me know, because I, to be honest, didn't go and look under every rock to find every announcement that is in here. They do updates weekly, and so trying to keep up with that yeah, it's kind of a nightmare because there is a lot of stuff that, at least at one point, my mailbox was just filling up with updates. Now that they have a forum, which is really nice, you can go there and look and see what announcements they have. for things that they're doing. So I'm going to end this here. I'm not going to go much further with this. It's just silly to do that. But yeah, I mean, GNOME is GNOME. It looks like, but one comment I will make, it looks like if you go through the bundle list that's on the website and go down through there, you'll start to notice that a lot of the desktops, like Awesome, well, I should say window managers like Awesome and i3 and so forth and so on, those, and also LQXT, I believe, LXQT, those are all being deprecated. And I have a suspicion it's because nobody's asking for those. But ones like, GNOME and KDE, also XFCE, which are very heavily used, they're still being supported, but they are starting to peel off. I mean, it just makes sense. You can't support, I mean, there's what, almost 100,000 packages in the Unix repo land if you put them all together. So yeah, that's just too much. It's too much. And so at some point you have to pare it down to what you actually are going to use. And I think that they're using the telemetry to help them do that in some regards. But the telemetry is more, I don't know how many messages I sent to them tonight by all those failures that was going on. But anyway, enough of that. Let's go on and do some final thoughts. All right, so let's talk about some of the final thoughts. So some of the things that I have seen, I did run into a bug with NVIDIA on hardware, so I tried to install it on my laptop that I've been using tonight to do the install in Proxmox. So I did try to install it there. It does have a problem with the second monitor. First monitor, fine, it's no big deal. But other than that, I mean, I haven't had any other problems tonight. I installed the benchmarks. I installed NFS. I got all that working. Gluster is way behind. It's like a 7.9, and that might be because they're staying in step with Red Hat, and that's where Red Hat is too, I believe, on their versions of Gluster. I did not try Ceph. I don't know which version of it they're using, so I'm guessing it's probably going to be similar, that it'll probably be in step with Red Hat. I think what I've noticed is that there's a lot of things that are being deprecated off, and it's probably because when they started, they probably had quite a few people working on the project, and now they pared back to like a normal kind of a cadence and trying to get things done. And they're probably going, well, we don't have that many people using this package or that package, so yeah, why put the effort into keeping it current? So it's probably what they're doing. I did notice that they seem to be pushing out a little bit, again, more finer grained bundles so that you don't have to install quite as much into the system in order for it to work. But, I mean, the tooling that's here for a developer or someone that's doing DevOps or Ansible, something like that, it's fine because you're going to be using all those tools. And like tonight, the performance tools, yeah, I don't have a big problem with that. I mean, those are things that I would use at some point anyway in trying to track down a problem with performance on a machine. So all in all, yeah, I know the telemetry is an issue for some, but I'm going to, again, I don't have an update for you tonight, but I will get one for you. And let's go take a look at the benchmarks.